Welcome everybody, this is Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors.
And this is Kevin Gordon, President of Capital Advisors Group.
We'd like to welcome you to our K-12 Politics and Tech video series.
Our objective is to give you the absolute latest of what's going on in Sacramento that affects public school districts, obviously, and as well as all the technology stuff that's going on that's so vital to delivering for kids these days.
And remember, if you find these videos useful, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and share out over social media. You're our marketing team. We appreciate your support, and let's go ahead and get started. All right, welcome everybody. Tim Watrous, President of Digital Advisors, back with another episode of K-12 Politics and Tech. As always, co-host of the show, Kevin Gordon, back after a week on vacation last week. Kevin, glad you're back here.
Yeah, it's good to be back.
Well, Kevin, start out with the state budget. It's a kind of a lingering thing. There's good news at the end of the day, but the fact is we still don't have the details everybody's anxiously waiting for. Can you tell us the latest there, please?
Yeah, really building on kind of what Jack shared last week, which is we're getting closer, which is that last week there was kind of no sign of any kind of movement in the sort of stalemate between the governor and the legislature having passed its budget on time, but awaiting a debate with the governor and the legislature over what would be the content of the K-12 education trader bill, the bill that implements really everything that are the unanswered questions about the school budget. And there are a lot of sort of lingering questions that we need to get answered. Well, we understand now that we're going to get language tomorrow that on the trader bill, and that is going to sort of answer the questions on a number of different issues where there were differences between the legislature's version and the governor's. And the ideas that would be queued up, we'd see that language tomorrow in time for meeting the requirements under law for there to be public disclosure of the details before a vote on Monday. So we think we'll probably see a vote on Monday. So early next week, we're going to probably have answers to all of those sort of open questions. So amongst the key pieces that we've been sort of awaiting were things that the legislature put into the budget mix that the governor didn't have. For example, there's more emphasis on special ed on top of what the governor was doing. As we know, we were going to get a bigger COLA on the governor's May revision compared to what he did in January. Well, the legislature was going to do that too, but they were going to put investments in other pots of special ed that were going to have a discretionary characteristic for school districts that I think people were happy with. So we look for that in the legislature's version. We also look for relief on STRS and PERS that was not in the governor's version of the budget. We also look for some assistance on the unemployment insurance issue, which we've talked about on this program before. That was really refreshing to see. So they kind of hit a number of these key issues. But the big outstanding one that we're still waiting for is to see what the compromise will end up being relative to the idea of distance learning and or independent study and how that shakes out. Again, what we're looking for are solutions that don't damage the utility of independent study that school districts have used for a long time, not for purposes of just achieving distance learning, but in fact, achieving goals that are inherent in independent study that serve many, many kids who would otherwise drop out. So we're hoping for a solution that respects the integrity of independent study as an ongoing approach to dealing with instruction for kids that need it, but at the same time, giving families and individual kids an option for distance learning next year when most kids will be coming back full-time in-person instruction. And so we'll see how that all works out.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, we'll keep our eye on that and let everybody know how things are progressing and when there's a final agreement for sure. So thank you for sharing that. Also, just on the note of remote learning, distance learning, there's a EdTech survey that comes out every year from COSIN, and that is the national version of CITE. Our friends at CITE is the national version there. And they basically do a survey of EdTech leaders around the US, and they ask, what are the key concerns, key challenges you're facing? So the number one, you'll not be surprised, is 60% of school districts school district respondents said the number one concern is the lack of support for remote learning. And we're talking about somebody has an issue and they can't get online to learn. 60% of districts said they didn't have adequate support to solve that. And you can imagine the old IT support teams that you had, were built for when everyone was on site, there was a teacher nearby. Maybe another student might give them a hand. That doesn't happen when they're learning remotely. So that's an easy one to understand. That's a really big number. 6 out of 10 don't have enough support for that. Number two is department silos and their different approaches to technology is one of the biggest challenges for technology today. So getting people on the same page, having people on the same page is a big challenge. That's the second. And then the third is concerns about digital equity. Of course, you can do everything you can to supply everyone with the same device, the same software. But if your internet connection is slower to student A than student B, the playing field isn't level and you have a major challenge there. That's a difficult thing for school districts to tackle. It's something we talk about on this show quite a lot. There are new systems and things in place. We had John Harrington on last week talking about what the FCC is doing. We know the state of California is putting some effort in, but of course that's a major issue: the digital divide, digital equity. So there are others. We'll put the link to the article in the underneath YouTube and in the email that goes out. But just so you know, that survey is very helpful. If you're experiencing these things, you're not alone. And again, a place like Site or COSIN is some places you can get some resources. I'll also just throw in a quick little plug for USC Rossier's, basically the IDLA program, which is the Innovative District Leadership Academy. We've talked about it on the show before. That's being blasted out in social media on LinkedIn and Twitter this week, but that's exactly what the Academy is built for. Bring in teams of leaders, attack challenges exactly like those department silos, getting everybody on the same page with a common approach to solving problems. And you'll be surrounded by tech leaders. You'll be able to build a network. Wonderful experts like John Harrington from last week, Kevin and his team, and many others are there to support. And of course, the wonderful staff at Rossier and the folks at Digital Advisors are partnering to do that. So make sure you get a chance, take a look and see if you're interested in joining us for that next fall. Kevin, we talked about AB 104 and retention. I know that's a big issue this week. Can you fill us in on that, please?
Yeah, I want to talk about that, but I actually wanted to make a little comment about the COSIN study that you mentioned. I think that's really interesting. And I think that one of the questions a lot of educators might be asking right now is relative to the learning that we got as a result of COSIN's data, and we do a look back to this last year about issues. I think some folks are asking the question, why do we care? Because, if we're going to go back to an in-person approach now back to opening up classrooms, what's the relevance? And the relevance is real, which is that if we find ourselves in a similar circumstance in the future, are we ready to grapple with those challenges? Let's learn from that and capitalize on whatever we need to do to build the infrastructure, both from a technology standpoint and the human infrastructure, to actually deliver for kids when we find ourselves in those circumstances. But the other real reason is because I don't think we're going to go backward in the idea of a device for every kid, because it can enhance obviously what's happening in the classroom. As a teacher says, let's take a look at an approach to a given concept, that you have this richness of all these resources that are online that you would have kids experience. And so it's like opening up your iPad or opening up your device locally and looking at something that walks you through, again, a concept that delivers that in a way that the student has greater accessibility to and understanding of. And so it's really important that we keep investing in these things that allow us to move the needle on instruction, leveraging the technology that we've learned so much about. So those surveys are really important, and it informs policymakers. So while there are some legislators and there's sentiment in Congress too that the idea of distance learning is something that's bad and got bad marks during the COVID crisis, what got bad marks was the fact that we all just had to deal with a huge turn very quickly from a non-in-person, environment to one that's totally digital, and giving kids the access and making it work. So of course there were major bumps in that road. And in a large way we overcame a lot of it, but we exposed some things that we need to work on. My view is in California, it helped expose the idea that the state had been investing so pathetically in technology that, God bless Jerry Brown, who said, let's get rid of a lot of these categorical programs and try to have things more streamlined and more local control. But the reality is that we weren't making investments in technology the way we needed to. And the legislature and the governor really stepped up there. And hopefully that'll continue.
If I can add one quick thing there, Kevin, I was on the phone with a few superintendent friends last week, and we were talking about, the next normal. And, one of their major concerns was not to lose some of the gains, some of the silver linings that we picked up in the pandemic. And that is that kids had been able to learn at home when they really hadn't before. So, the ability for students to learn anytime, anywhere, to be connected to the internet and what the doors that opens for them in life, they really wanted to hold on to something like that. And I think, your point is wonderful, but that's something the pandemic forced us into a situation that has some good outcomes. Let's hold on to those and make sure we don't lose them. So sorry, I didn't mean to take you off track.
No. So back to AB 104 that you brought up. So Assemblymember Lorena Gonzalez from the San Diego area was rightfully concerned about, as we look back over this year, there were conditions for some kids where they just weren't able to achieve at the academic levels that they'd be used to. How do we address those issues? Or the students that really struggled and kind of lost that year, what do we do to help bootstrap them? And you know what? She shares a concern that was echoed by the entire legislature. We've seen it all across the country, even the Biden administration, when they talk about the idea of intervention and extended learning going forward. Or as Dr. Paul Gothold in San Diego County says, let's talk about accelerating learning. But the whole point is what are we going to do to try to mitigate the impacts instructionally on our kids over the last year? So she had AB 104, and one of the things that was a little disturbing about it to a lot of people who understand the research about retention is that it had a pretty big emphasis on the idea of sort of empowering parents to know they had this tool of just basically having your kid repeat their grade. But the science and the research behind us tells us how that it was not a great strategy, especially if just uniformly applied without really considering the unique circumstances of each and every kid who might be considering that. So instead of just sort of putting it out there like it's an endorsed automatic solution to the problems for your child and prompting it in a way that almost encouraged it, the bill was amended and to be a much more sensible piece of legislation that talks about the imperative for school districts to respond, that if a parent is requesting it, that you do some analysis very quickly within a 30-day period of that request, and that a decision be made within 10 days of that consultation that you do after that point about whether or not there would be retention, but that the decision rests in the hands of school administrators who are best positioned to weigh the pros and cons of having that actually occur. But in addition to that, the legislation would allow for parents to opt for changing the letter grades to a pass no fail type of approach. So there were a number of different kinds of tools embedded in the legislation that will go straight to the governor as an urgency bill to take effect immediately, as opposed to most legislation, which when it passes doesn't take effect till January the following year. So it is an urgency bill. It will be considered by the governor, and I suspect it'll end up getting signed. But just wanted to kind of put that out there that that's headed our way. CSBA is wonderful about putting together an administrative regulation and a board policy for every statute that gets passed. So you'll look for CSBA to have more guidance on that as well.
Well, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, definitely appreciate the update there. Wanted to move into another tech topic here, which is just an ounce of prevention for those of you who've deployed several devices, a big number of devices. We talked last week about the Emergency Connectivity Fund, ECF, and that's going to allow you $400 per student to buy them a device. When you're thinking about the devices that you're deploying, the hotspots that you're deploying, you may have already run into this snag or you may be about to, but inventory management of your technology, especially when it leaves the building, is so important. And if you do some work up front to make sure you have all your inventory in place, you're really going to make your life much easier when it's the end of the year and the kids need to turn those devices in. You can basically have a very simple time and easy time managing, knowing where they are, knowing that everything came back. or you can have a very difficult time trying to manually run that process. So make sure as you're acquiring devices, you're thinking about that big picture of how do I know where these things are? How do I know I can support them? How do I know when they come back that I have them all back? And make your life as simple as possible early. It's much better than the tangle that you could be in if you don't do any of that work up front. So that's basically called inventory management for technology. If you haven't done it yet, please look into it. It'll save you a big bunch of time. And Kevin, with that, finally, we wanted to just talk about the CDPH revised guidance that came out that we're waiting for. Excuse me. So can you fill us in on that, please?
Yeah, it's just that what we're anticipating or hoping for and urging the California Department of Public Health is to give more clarity around the most recent advice given by Cal OSHA with regard to masking and all those sort of things. So the guidance has become a lot clearer with regard to offices, private sector place, even public sector place where we don't have students. But it did say essentially all the rules still apply with regard to masking. With regard to schools. Well, the problem is that if in an office environment, we don't have to mask up, let's say at a district office where we're not necessarily seeing students, but you do in a school, do you in the principal's office, or where do you do it and where don't you? And I think without any further guidance, there's going to be a reluctance by the fact that, we're not sure where we're going to have student traffic. Is it going to be about where we're delivering instruction in classrooms, or what will be the necessity of school districts relative to masking? We need more guidance from CDPH. We're pushing for that. We're anticipating that we'll get it, but it's probably a couple weeks off. But I just wanted folks to know that we're working on that, because it's really hard to have a consistent, coherent policy in a school district when it's sort of up to interpretation about how this thing goes into effect. So what we're hoping for is that they'll basically say, here are the rules relative to masking, and they should probably apply where direct instruction is being given. But in all areas, other areas, this notion of sort of people wearing a mask if they have not actually had the immunization, and it's sort of the honor system would apply in most areas where we have administrators doing their work, but maybe in the classroom you would have the masking requirement. So we'll see how that goes. I'm anticipating we could even see another change before the fall when instruction actually takes place, depending on what's going on with regard to case rates and such.
Okay, well, thank you for filling us in on that. And I know it's something in our society we're working out as well. Companies are grappling with it, and of course, school districts is a similar scenario. So thanks for filling us in. And with that, Kevin, I just want to say thank you for being back. Glad to have you back, and we'll look forward to doing this again next week. So thank you very much.
All right, good to be back again. Thanks. So thanks again for joining us for another week of this broadcast.
And I just want to take a moment to remind you, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and share this out over social media. Again, you're our marketing team. I'll also finish by saying, if you have some questions, please send them our way. We'd be happy to address them on a future broadcast. So with that, thanks everybody, and we'll talk soon.